So, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us for the first ASLE Spotlight of 2022. ASLE seeks to inspire and promote intellectual work in the environmental humanities and arts. Our vision is an inclusive community whose members are committed to environmental research, education, literature, art and service, environmental justice, and ecological sustainability. For more information on the organization or to sign up for the future spotlights, visit our website, asle.org. That's ASLE.org. The second spotlight, Entangled Geographies, will be held on Friday, April 22nd. That's Earth Day at 2 p.m. Eastern Time in the US. Just a reminder, we do have closed captioning turned on, so feel free to use that. We are recording this episode to be shared in the future. If you could, make sure that you keep yourselves muted throughout the episode so that we're not distracting from our wonderful guests today. And then if you have any questions as the panelists are talking, feel free to throw those into the chat, and we'll do our best to get to some of those towards the end of the episode. So I am excited to welcome you all to this first ASLE Spotlight on performance and engagement. And I'm joined today with my co-host, Joshua Calhoun.
Thanks, Brandon. I'm really excited as well to be here and happy to be co-hosting with Brandon Gom. And Brandon is the founder and co-host of the ASLE EcoCast podcast. He's also the department chair and instructor of English and speech at Cloud County Community College. And I'm so happy to be doing this with you here today, Brandon.
Yeah, thanks. And Josh is an associate professor at UW-Madison, author of The Nature of the Page, Poetry, Papermaking, and Ecology in Renaissance England. And he's the co-hoster and founder of the new Holding History podcast. So today we're going to be talking about performance and engagement in some ways with the various ways that our panelists have arrived at this. And performance surround us. We watch plays and films, give praise and credit to powerful, truthful actors, but each of us in our own way also embodies performance daily. The clothes we wear costume us. Our behaviors are driven by social scripts. This spotlight and our four guests asked us to consider our performance in the world and to move that performance into positive, active engagement with our communities and our world.
Yeah, and performance is also a powerful form of public engagement. There's this vulnerability in performance that engages audiences and makes them hold their breath with us and hope for our success. And even in that moment of showing our own vulnerability in performance, there's an invitation to engage, an invitation to open your own vulnerabilities and to allow a different kind of conversation than you may have been having before the performance. Our guests today are glowing examples of this kind of performance as an inclusive and vulnerable, meaningful spaces of public engagement. And we're so excited to speak with them.
Yes, absolutely. So our first presenter that we're going to hear from today is Janisse Ray. Janisse is a best-selling writer whose subject is often nature. Ray's won a Pushcart, New York Times Notable, and American Book Award. Her previous books include Ecology of a Cracker Childhood, The Seed Underground, A Growing Revolution to Save Food, Wildcard Quilt, Taking a Chance on Home, and the poetry book Red Lanterns. Janisse, whenever you are ready, please take it away.
Brandon, thank you. And thank you, Josh. Thank you, Amy, and all of ASLE. ASLE is one of my favorite organizations, and it's so nice to be a part of this. I wrote my first book of nature writing in 1999. And I did it because I was extremely concerned. Let me see what time we're at. Brandon, will you time me for 5 minutes? Is that okay? I was extremely concerned about the world, and I wanted to see, I've always said that I don't care about fame and money. I just want to see a change in the way that we humans occupy both the constructed environments and the natural environments. So I was forced pretty young onto stages, because of this just desire inside of me. And it meant that I did try to develop ways of presenting information that I thought would be more helpful. I want to just talk about this last book, because after, like 10 years had gone by and I had not published a book, and I have a new book out from Trinity Press. So it's called Wild Spectacle. You see the name of it there. We're just, most of the news that we're getting these days is dark. And I wanted to really show, I wanted to document why it's important that we love the earth and are acting in every way possible, every day, every minute of every day, in ways that defend and protect it. So I have never published a collection of essays, and I really admire writers like John McPhee, who, he's writing for the New Yorker, and every year he does this collection. And so I began to look through essays that I'd written, and the theme, the obvious theme is just, even as a person born in poverty and a person who chose to be an independent writer, unaffiliated with a university or an organization, like really just making my living, making my way independently, that I have been able to see some amazing sights. And so I've collected these essays based on, they're essays about what I found, what I saw, what I heard, what I thought, and what I learned when I sojourned in the wild. I actually want to read you about 3 paragraphs from the last piece, because this is the thing that we talked about vulnerability in the introductions, but that's really not, to get up in front of people is a vulnerable thing, but it's not what I think about. I took some kids into Okefenokee Swamp, and in the middle of the swamp, one of the kids drank from a Powerade bottle in which I had poured lamp oil. So I had this kid who was poisoned, in the middle of this. It's a very wide, 30-mile wide wilderness, and we were way out in it. And I had to tie him in a kayak to the back of my boat and haul him back out and get him out in time so that he was okay. I was in a horror movie. The camera was panning. A woman was in focus, churning 2 boats forward while the landscape streamed by in a blur. The woman was becoming bigger and bigger until she was archetypal. She was a warrior, teeth and claws on strings around her neck, bangles rattling on her wrists. She was transforming into one of the matriarchs pictured on a tarot card. Her torso grew into a lioness's, horns sprang from her head, and in her hands she wielded a lightning bolt. And so then I'm going to skip to the very end of this essay, which published in Terrain, thankfully. One of the most important poses in yoga is a warrior asana. Knees bent, arms outstretched, looking forward over the right fingers. It's a pose that requires strength and balance, training for both the physical body and the wisdom body to respond when we're called to action. In this asana, the demons of ego, fear, and jealousy can be slain. As my yoga teacher likes to remind me, you need more than a wish. You need burning desire and fierce determination. When I am in this pose, I know that I'm in training, learning to be aware, to not turn a blind eye, to not back down, to not give up. Sometimes the only weapon we have is awareness. Sometimes all we have is a little light that we can shine outward into a big darkness. Sometimes, however, we tap into our superpowers, and then we can transcend and bring about transcendence. Most of us, most of our lives are asked to live small. Most of us quit trying very young to live the bigness we know is possible. Now, no matter what I choose or what is asked of me, I know what I became. That long, long night, I paddled alone through shamanic darkness in the desolate wilderness just this side of the ultimate wilderness. So that's it. That's my public engagement and performance piece, that I try to remind people of their power to change their lives, to change their city, their state, their country, the entire world.
Thanks so much, Janisse. And I'm delighted to now introduce our next guest, Odile Cisneros, who received a PhD in Spanish and Portuguese languages and literatures from New York University. She's associate professor in the Department of Modern Languages and Cultural Studies at the University of Alberta. And we're so excited to hear about Ecopoesia from you.
Well, thank you so much, Brian, Joshua, Joshua, and thanks so much also Brandon, Amy, and Bridget for inviting me to this wonderful event. It's really an honor. And also thank you to ASLE for supporting this project. A few years ago, I began thinking about really the connection between literature and environment in Latin America. It seemed to me that there was a lot going on with this engagement in the realm of English and English language studies, American poetry, and so on. And as we know, a lot of the early scholarly work really engaged mostly the poetry of Romanticism in Britain and engaged nature writing in the United States. I'm a scholar of Latin American poetry, and I found that interestingly, if we look at the production of Latin American poetry, it really could be seen as poetry that is ecological avant la lettre. So even before there was a sort of a formulation of environmental thinking, many poets in Latin America were already thinking about this and in their writing, but also in their activism. And so I really wanted to approach this topic both from the perspective of research and from the perspective of teaching. So I came up with a course that was based around this. And as a result of that, I also started thinking about trying to put together a collection. There was no collection of writing, so there's wonderful anthologies of environmental poetry, even here in Canada, in the US, there's many different, but there was nothing that really brought together the expression of Latin American poets. And so this is how Ecopoesia began, both as a pedagogical tool and also as a research tool. And with regards to the question of engagement as well, the idea of bringing this poetry to the wider public. So that was my hope, my goal with Ecopoesia was to bring these poets that are scattered in many ways, in many venues, and to bring them in one place and to curate a collection that would allow readers to do things that they could not possibly do with a book, for example. So I will now share my screen and then just give you a little bit of a tour. I think, let's see, I would like to, I don't know if you can see my screen, just to give you a sense of how this works. Can everybody see that? Yeah, okay, perfect. So, Ecopoesia, as I said, is a kind of a curated site that presents perspectives on environment and poetry from Latin America. And so the features that I think are sort of unique about this is that we offer not only a kind of what you would expect to find in any anthology, which is a collection of authors and their work. And so we've included authors from many parts of Latin America, and I will show that in a second. We have a map for that. So we have short biographies here, and also a collection of some of their poems, and also related resources. This is a work in progress, so we're still filling in the blanks for some of these poets. But So you are able to just be able to look at, look up poets, from different parts of Latin America, and also to engage their work in different ways. The other thing that is, I think, again, unique and important is to be able to offer this work in different languages. So the site is trilingual. We have English translations. We're working on providing as much as possible in English. We also have, of course, the originals in Spanish and in Portuguese. So you can switch up here. You can switch the language of the website if you like. The other thing that we tried to do was to also provide ways of looking at this poetry as sort of collections around different topics. So if you go to the main page, and I'll switch to the English now again, you can also search poems by words in the poem themselves. So it's a regular search. And you can also, we've created some sort of categories where we've basically combined poems in different ways. So these categories, as you can see here, for example, human/nature, sort of problematize the idea of what it means to be human, nature, vegetal life, wilderness, different, earthcapes. So we have created also these smaller collections. So clicking on them, you're able to get a collection of poems that would sort of speak to some of these different topics. So each poem also comes with a sort of illustration. Some of them, not all of them, but so we wanted to make the website quite simple in the sense that as a reader of poetry, you don't want to be distracted very much. You just want the text there. But if you're interested, there's always more that you can find. There's also a way that the poems are linked to place. We created a Google map where you can, it's not necessarily that all of them are directly related to the place that we pinpoint here on the map, but it's also a way of locating. So if you move around on this map, you're able to see, for example, something very fascinating here, which is that Central America, small as it is, contains a really, really sort of a production that is really sort of kind of outsizes the territory. So that's a way of visualizing also the production in a different way. So I think my 5 minutes are up, so I'll leave it at that, but I really invite you to explore the website and let me know what you think. I'll put the link in the chat, and I really appreciate the opportunity to bring this to your attention. Thank you so much. And I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, Odile. So our next presenter is Petra Kuppers. Petra is a disability culture activist and community performance artist and teaches at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Her third collection is the Ecosomatic Gut Botany, one of the top 10 poetry books of 2020 for the New York Public Library. She's the artistic director of the Olympias, a disability culture collective, and co-directs Turtle Disco, a somatic writing space. You can also visit her at her website, www.petrakuppers.com.
Thank you so much. Thank you for making me part of this. I'm delighted to be here. And I just dropped in, all right, it's just before Odile, sorry about that. I just dropped in the 2 links for my book as well. One is a link to the open access version, so you can read the whole thing. And the other one is to the introduction and the flyer, which you're very welcome to have here and to share, because it's really nice to have an open access book for once, right? So, I don't have to worry about publicity or trying to flog it to anybody. I can just give it away. Just wonderful. So I am Petra Kuppers, and my pronouns are she and her, and I am a a white cis queer woman with a nearly bald head and with yellow glasses, who's wearing right now a pink shirt, which goes very nicely with my lipstick. And I am right now in Florida. I'm in Seminole territory, and I am in a hotel room, which has an absolutely amazing background to the bed here. This is a very interesting rhizomatic background right behind me, completely fortuitously, but absolutely suited to an ASLE session. So thank you so much for being here. Normally, I'm on Anishinaabe territory in Michigan. That's where I live. And that is very much the background for what I'm sharing with you here. I'm sharing my new book, Soma, Pain and Joy in Speculative Performance Encounters, with the University of Minnesota Press. And it's a book that's grounded in and moves from disability culture. So it's a book that is very much concerned with the arts and culture created by disabled people, where we share our pain and pleasure, heft and depth. And it's just been such a joy to put this book together. It charts just over 10 years worth of performance encounters, both encounters where I am witnessing other people's work and also where I am creating with my collaborators our own performances. So each chapter has one of our own performances as well as other people's performances. And what we were discussing is finding pain and joy in relation to our environments, our Umwelts. I'm German, so I do use the word Umwelt, but it does mean our environments both in material terms, in terms of the nets that we're part of, and also in terms of the sociocultural and historical aspects that make up our environment, just as much as the environments that we can touch with our senses. A lot of the work is about being where we are and feeling ourselves in space. So right now, just for this little second, in these 5 minutes, I just invite you to take a breath with me and to just become aware what you're sitting on. And this is the kind of invitation that you find strewn throughout the book. I invite you to become aware of what supports you right now, if you're sitting, if you're standing, if you're lying, whatever position you're in as you're participating in this online event here. And to just feel what holds you, what offers you support. And if it's accessible to you, take your hands and touch the surface that you are sitting on right now, or lying on, or standing on, or walking on. And just feel what it is that you are touching. What do you touch? Do you touch wood, metal, plastic, cotton? Just try to sense into what it is. And for a second, just let your mind go on a fantasy journey of where this material comes from. So in the longer meditations that I lead and that I also discuss in here, we're looking at where oil comes from, where in ancient forests, where trees fall down into the water, where sediments accumulate above them, where deep pressure transforms them into what becomes oil, where we think about how oil through polymerization becomes plastic. We're trying to make our way through and touch in with different kinds of time periods, different time signatures. On the cover here, let me audio describe the cover for you. So on the cover, we see someone who's also in a different time signature. We see a person that has clay or paint all over their body, and that has a chest brace. And this person is lying in or emerging out of green materials. Looks like sumac, some kind of plant material of the Pacific Northwest. And around this figure are wound the letters of Soma. But this person here, which is Julia Arakelian from Wobbly Dance, a disabled dance artist, is moving in different time signatures. So we get a sense of crypt time. We can touch in with crypt time. We can touch in the fact that we're all living in different kinds of time frameworks. So throughout the book, I'm discussing people who live often at odds with dominant culture, and who create work that allows us to centrally touch in, somatically embodied, touch in what it means to create, to find both pain and pleasure in time differences, in different ways in which we are attentive to the world. And performance is one of the ways in which we can do that. So thank you for letting me share some of this, and I hope you enjoy the read.
Thank you so much, Petra. It's wonderful to hear these, and we'll go on to our next and final guest here, and then we'll have some time for discussion. Spencer Robbins is a PhD candidate in the English department at UCLA. His research focuses on narratives of collective action and world making in response to environmental change. He has also worked as a writer and researcher on projects with the Laboratory for Environmental Narrative Strategies, or LENS, and his writing has appeared in the Paris Review, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and at kcet.org. Spencer, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. And yeah, I'm here to tell you a little bit about LensCast, which is the podcast of the Laboratory for Environmental Narrative Strategies, which is an environmental humanities research group at UCLA that's really interested in public engagement and public storytelling as academic practices. So, sorry, excuse me. So my goal here is to introduce you to the podcast a little bit, and also just to kind of briefly pose a question about how embracing a public form of engagement like a podcast might or might not change the kind of work that environmental humanists do and the kinds of stories we tell. So like what particular kinds of stories does a podcast encourage? So in 2021, a team of students at UCLA began producing LensCast, an experiment in forms of audio environmental storytelling. And as the slide shows, we first produced a set of episodes on our own, which consist of 2 stories focused on environmental justice issues in LA. And these are both available on our website, which I'll link in the chat, and also on various podcast hosting platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts and things like that. And the idea for both of these first 2 episodes was to take a potentially familiar issue or object and re-narrate it through a lens of environmental justice and historical research. So for example, our first episode, produced by Matthew Swanson, does that with LA's iconic trees, especially its palms. We tried to show how LA's trees are both part of a history of colonial conquest and also how they can be vectors for environmental justice and injustice. And in our second episode, similarly, which was produced by Gregory Toy, we wanted to complicate the mainstream environmental movement's embrace of green infrastructure projects like transit. So the title of this episode, Please Take Off Your Shoes, comes from a motto shared with us by activists in LA's Little Tokyo neighborhood who are fighting the displacement caused by the construction of a major transit project there. So for both of these episodes, we talked with activists, artists, and academics. And so both of these follow a fairly familiar interview-based format. Like they try to be original in content and to look at familiar issues from new angles informed by scholarship. But in format, they're fairly familiar as podcasts. But also in 2021, Lens partnered with another research group at UCLA, the LAbyrinth Project, which uses a mix of interviewing, ethnographic fieldwork, and digital archival research to explore the construction and contestation of natures in Los Angeles. So basically, they had done a summer's worth of fieldwork that resulted in them having this incredible research archive that included a lot of audio recordings. And they wanted to experiment with presenting it in creative form. So we decided to collaborate on a set of episodes based on those materials with a focus on questions of multi-species justice and multi-species encounter. And what was really interesting with this approach we took to the second set of episodes was the challenge of taking this archive of materials that were not gathered with a podcast in mind and thinking creatively about how to animate them in ways that were narratively, sonically, and analytically interesting. So for example, in an episode that I narrated called Coyotes in the Cloud, we wanted to use posts, anonymized posts from the neighborhood message board app Nextdoor that the team had gathered, posts in which Los Angeles residents debated fairly intensely what to do about the city's population of urban coyotes. And we didn't have recordings of these posts, they were just text. So what we ultimately did was perform them. We had team members read them as sort of parts in like an audio play about imagining these cloud coyotes as vicious killers moving through digital neighborhoods. And this episode also built on really extraordinary ethnographic research on urban coyote-human interactions by my fellow graduate student, Chase Niesner, from which I learned about the surprising intersections between anti-coyote, anti-homeless, and even anti-Black Lives Matter politics in Los Angeles. But our sort of emotional performance of these next door debates led us to think hard about the role online coyote debates play in mobilizing these destructive political affects. And that actually ultimately led to further research and to a co-authored paper where we analyze cloud coyotes as a feature of the settler colonial imagination that governs LA's ecology today. So I think that's an exciting example of how experimenting with the podcast form, its capacity for performance and sonic layering and juxtaposition actually helped generate an argument rather than just being a vehicle for a pre-existing set of ideas, like the form inspired the thinking we were doing in that episode. And that's what's exciting to me about this project. It suggests that collaborative experiments in a public form of storytelling can lead to new stories and a richer understanding of human and non-human lives. So we have lots of other episodes, including about the interdependence of rats and lions in Los Angeles, about the dilemmas raised by LA's massive population of feral cats, and about the satanic cult that founded the no-kill movement in Los Angeles. I hope these sound interesting. I hope you'll give the podcast a listen. I'll post the link again in the chat. And I'm excited to discuss today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Spencer. Okay, so the next segment here, we've Josh and I have a couple of questions, and we're just going to kind of open these up to our panelists and hear what they have to say about them. So I'll kick things off with mine. I'm curious. So we've been talking today about the different aspects of performance and public engagement that your work kind of attempts to embody and things like that. But I'm curious how you bridge that with the performance or engagement of your audience as well. In other words, how does your work or yourself embody these performative aspects, and what do you hope that your audience will take away from that, right? Rather than just reading or listening, what's that thing that you want to move them into action with so that they're actually performing themselves in really positive ways?
So Brandon, I will jump in. This is Janisse. I was thinking as we were all talking, and I'm just so glad to get introduced to everybody's work. I was realizing that I have, for the past couple of years, been really grappling with this idea of books and the efficacy of books. So when I began as a young nature writer, books were everything. We didn't have the internet and all the things that we have now. And I know the number of copies of my first book that sold, and I know the number of copies of my last book that just came out, and they're very, very different numbers. So I know this is an aside, but I'm just really glad that we're talking in this forum about this, that I don't want to give up the book. And so as you were asking the question, I was realizing, I'm a reader. I read. Books transformed my life, and I want to do that to others, but it may no longer be the best, way to reach people. Thank you.
And this is Petra. I'm happy to speak to this one because performance is central to what I do. I might love books too, but performance is my main modality. And I'm very excited, not only in witnessing performance, which of course has been so hard over the last 2 years. Like our field has been so hard hit by this inability to be with each other energetically, fully, three-dimensionally, somatically. That I'm very excited to share this work again and see how we can think together about what is so special about being together three-dimensionally. And the performances that I'm discussing in this book span from Australia, a lot of performances in Detroit, a lot of Anishinaabe performance work, a lot of work with people in water, a lot of disabled people going swimming together in water. And I'm just, in like swimming pools, on beaches, in lakes, in rivers. And I'm trying in the book to invite audiences to come with me, so like many, many times you will find these invitations similar to the one we just went through with What Are You Sitting On? To become aware of yourself as embodied beings as you're reading. So Janisse, as you just say, right, we have books as here, this mode of communication, and yet books can also invite us to experience ourselves and our bodies differently. So we can use our fantastical imaginations to transform ourselves into salamanders. We can use them to grow gills. We can undo the world we live in and live differently. We can look at injustices, at white supremacy. We can look at the effects of violence in the world and imagine what it's like to live differently. So those are performances that we can activate through reading practices as well as through feeling, sensing, and being practices.
I love this invitation to think about and the thoughts that we've heard so far about the relationship to audience and performance, and the kind of performance we're asking our audiences to engage in. And one thing I think about in connection with our work is the name Labyrinth is meant to invoke the sense that exploring nature in LA means stepping into a set of relationships that you don't understand in advance, and that you're going to discover connections between, and maybe surprising and challenging connections between along the way. And that really described well our process for making the podcast. We started with this huge set of research materials, audio recordings, interviews, encounters, and we didn't know what the shape of the stories we wanted to tell about that archive were going to be in advance. We actually used a really interesting kind of improvisatory process where we used mind mapping software to trace possible connections between these different clips and to look for emergent story ideas that often kind of intersected with each other, and using the same clip in multiple stories and things like that. So we've tried in the episodes to kind of embody that same process of discovery and what we're asking our listeners to do, to not preview too much the argument or the story that each episode is going to tell, to sort of maintain that sense of surprise, and to try to maintain moments of surprise and discovery we encountered in the way we then present those moments to our listeners. So I think there's an ask of the audience, and maybe a challenge to the audience, to be uncomfortable and open to the possible connections that you're going to encounter over the course of each of these episodes. At their best, I think they kind of bridge our process for making them, and hopefully our audience's process for hearing them.
Odile, I want to make sure if you wanted a chance to take a shot at that question, you have time, but of course we have other questions as well.
Yeah, sure. So just just really quickly, I think I'll just sort of speak about what I, just elaborate a little bit on what I said earlier, that, when I started thinking about this project, the engagement, I think, I don't think that my project is so much about performance, but it is about engagement, engaging different audiences through, a medium that would allow, readers to do different things that they wouldn't be able to do with a book, which is what I mentioned, for example, having multiple, having a trilingual site that could reach audiences far and wide, but at the same time, trying to connect them to place. So that's one of the things that I had in mind. And also the fact that, I believe in the transformative power of poetry. I really do. I am a poetry reader, and I believe that, just as much as there is activism you know, on the one hand, there's also that kind of transformation that happens, and that sort of, you know, insight that a reader will gain, you know, from a poem that, you know, speaks to them. And so part of this is also engaging the audience at that level, you know, at the level, I think, of their, you know, sort of consciousness. So I think that poetry affects us in ways that are very different from political discourse. So that is what my objective is with this site, is really to bring this poetry that cannot, you know, reach audiences otherwise, because, again, you know, because of language barriers, because of, you know, just publication barriers and all kinds of things, put it in one place and make it available, so that people can explore and can, again, to use the same word, can engage with it, you know, on their own terms.
Thanks so much. I know we're going to have time for other questions. I have one more question. And I want to say I'm just impressed with this work. I enjoyed looking at your work. And I was curious, though, as I looked at your projects, about maybe the frustrations or anxieties we don't see. The metaphor that came to my mind was feeling that we all have, and I'm sorry, is it really echoey for you? It is, okay. I have been having issues. Is it a little better now?
No, I got it. Yeah, there was someone that was not muted, so I got that covered.
Okay, sorry about that. We've all had this experience maybe of having a shirt that used to fit really nicely, and maybe because we've grown or because of the dryer or something like that, it suddenly just doesn't quite cover the belly, right? And then you're anxious all day because you keep pulling it down, and yet, like, most of us wouldn't notice that, but you feel self-conscious, you don't reach above your head, and you're just kind of aware of this thing. I know I felt that in projects, and I just wondered, I hope I'm not the only one. Have you felt that in your own projects? In these projects you've presented to us, are there bits you're trying to pull down so we don't see them, but that really are, those vulnerabilities are important to the work, and maybe that you wouldn't mind talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to just briefly jump in on this. I love this question, and I love the metaphor of the shirt that doesn't quite fit. And I think maybe a perfect example for us of the shirt that doesn't quite fit is the concept of the episode as a standard affordance of the podcast form. So I described earlier our process, right, for coming up with our story ideas, where we took this huge collection of short sound bites and interviews and images and stories and encounters, and started exploring interconnecting questions between them, connections between them, using the metaphor of the labyrinth and our explorations of the labyrinth. And early on, we wanted that formal quality of the storytelling to be part of the experience of listening, not just part of the experience of making the project. So we envisioned, for example, a sort of visual website where different lines made different connections across the same body of materials, so that people could listen in different orders, could encounter the same, say, interview clip in different episodes with different themes, so that they would have different meanings upon different encounters, and really have a much more exploratory and self-directed listening experience. And we were really excited about that. And then we started to run up against the realities of podcast distribution, where if you want people, I mean, you use the word podcast, people expect to be able to find it on like Apple Podcasts. And on Apple Podcasts, you have to upload in the form of individual bounded episodes. And so for a while, we were trying to sort of have it both ways, where within the episodes, we would have moments of interruption that would say, hey, if you want to explore in this different direction, go listen to this other episode. And then we started sharing it with audiences, and they all hated that. And we're like, what? That's not how a podcast works. It's episode 1, 2, 3. I listen in order. It's like right there on the screen. So we ended up, you know, really kind of backing our way into a much more standard, again, I hope within these episodes, the forms feel very experimental and interesting and exploratory and surprising. But our desire to engage the public and the realities of sharing work in a public format that's sort of pre-designed under certain assumptions about the form of consumption that people are looking for, that really ends up shaping the work in a way that maybe is interesting and exciting and productive, but also very limiting. So that that's something we're still thinking about, is how can we push against those formal constraints even as we operate within them.
I'm happy to speak to that too. It's interesting. When you're putting a book together, there are always moments of uncertainty and, you know, what should I put in? What should I speak to? How has the historical moment changed? And moments of stumbling were very clear to me in the writing, you know, as I'm trying to write as someone who, as a disabled person on her scooter, enters into Black hosted performances, into Indigenous hosted performances. And as I'm encountering my own, you know, the limits of what I can respectfully witness, what I understand, what I'm able to share. And so the notion of stumbling, unclarity, figuring out, acknowledging, guest status is very central to the book. So there's multiple places where I left the stumbles in, including leaving in descriptions that I then have to revisit as I'm in dialogue, as I'm in collaboration with people around me, and I'm becoming aware of my own learning journey. So these moments are in there. So you will find me revisiting what I just said and redoing it in order to show what has happened, you know, what it is that I'm doing that allows me to engage with a reference field that is not mine to begin with. So it's particularly strong, I think, in the Indigenous and settler chapter. And then there also are other moments where I'm trying to find other ways of acknowledging multivocality in the book. And one of the chapters has a whole segment where many, many different collaborators come together in a montaged web of, we have utterances from many, many different people who participated in the Salamander project, going swimming with disabled people, going underwater together, taking our air away. And then people write about that experience afterwards in many different languages. And we're creating this web. And normally disabled people get written about, you know, we get diagnosed, our stuff gets taken apart, and people figure out what's up, what's going wrong, what's right, whatever. And I'm very much trying not to do that. You know, we're very, very much not trying to become material for other people to read. So how can one host multiple voices without these voices becoming fodder for diagnostic procedures? So I'm very interested in the difference between analysis and diagnostic procedure. And then yet in another chapter where we're engaging in a performance called The Journey to the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin, which, by the way, all many of these shows have videos attached that you'll be able to see, so you can always get your own sense of what performances are. In that performance, I'm not talking about the after show discussions that people had. You know, I'm very specifically honoring the privacy of people who were in a performance that was quite emotionally challenging. If you read about it, you could actually imagine Journey to the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin, hosted by Jewish and non-Jewish German people, both disabled. It's a very challenging experience to go through. And it's an experience we go through with Australian Aboriginal activists, with people who lived and remember the division of the Indian and Pakistani borders, you know, multiple kinds of human divisions. And then also in engagement with plant life and painkillers as plant life. So in all this melange of so many different witnesses, having such different perspectives on the show, at times I step back and don't say everything that's happened in those spaces in order to give people privacy. So there we once again open up to active readers. We invite you to have your own response. You know, there is this moment of holding space for you all. So these are all, you know, having these kinds of discussions are all stumbling moments. They're all moments where you think, ooh, here's the shirt and here's the body, and how do I make this fit? So thank you for the metaphor.
I can jump in, Janisse again. You know, thinking about vulnerabilities, Josh, I think that for any of us to step into a project requires, you know, stepping through so many questions, and these always sometimes they trip me and I fall, and that would be questions of our own adequacy and so forth, you know, all of our own shame. And then beyond that, I will question myself about, so there's so much in the world. There's so many people are producing their art. We're all producing these narratives. And does the world, you know, do you need more things flying at you? So then I have to cross through that gauntlet of fire. And then usually I go through this one, which is, okay, look at the resources this is going to use. Like, another book in the world. Do we need another book in the world? We all know we should be planting trees, you know, and we think that computers are not harming the environment, but they completely, the energy that's being used, even as we're all on it right now, all the natural resources that went into making these devices. So, you know, me, as a purist, you know, as somebody who just loves the wild world and hates to see it being destroyed. And I have to really walk through all that. That's why I quit flying. I quit flying 13 years ago because of this. It just didn't make sense that I, in my love for the world, would also destroy it. And then the last thing I want to talk about is this always comes up for me in any project, book, engagement. And that is, we have to pass through the narratives that are being spoken to us by mainly corporate capitalistic society, by militarism, by industrialism. And I think it's what makes our work so very important, because much of our work is a negation of those dominant paradigms. And it's so very important to reach people with these other alternative cross-cultural stories. And yet there's always that place where this society that we belong to of capitalism is a barrier.
Odile, anything that you want to add to that question?
Not to that question necessarily, but I actually just wanted to pick up on something that's been asked in the chat, if that's okay. So I think Gisela asked, related to Latin America, teaches environmental justice. How can you talk about the concrete and tangible, how these engage, or can these engagements, how concrete and tangible can these engagements the general audience be? How do you get a sense of who's engaged with your project? How often this occurs? Fascinatingly, of course, websites do have a way of tracking, who goes to your website and who's, so I think, that is another tool. I mean, speaking about technologies and speaking about, just different resources that are available to us, in this day and age. And I'm also a book lover, by the way, but, there's things that I think websites and other technologies do better, and that allow us to kind of extend the reach, extend that engagement further. And so there's the Google Analytics, I guess. I never really looked into the Google Analytics for my website, but it is a way of saying, hey, somebody, in Patagonia found my website and they're reading about it. And so that's exciting also to just see the reach of some of these projects, which you think, you're sitting in your office working on this, and does anybody really care about what I'm doing? And you're able to connect in that way. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, that was a great question posed by Gisela in the chat there. Does anybody else want to speak on that in regards to their work at all?
Yeah, I really also enjoyed that question. And I don't really have necessarily an answer to how to track this, but I do think that pushing for open access is a really good way to think about economic justice. So within the proviso of what we've just heard, that obviously everything has costs. It's not as if anything's for free, but particularly if you're working with or about people who might not have access to university accounts or finances to buy books. It's amazing that we are able, that many of us are able, if we can, to push our publishers towards open access, because I know that this work can go to many more disabled people than my other work did, even though, again, all of that has been made available, but more in subterranean ways. Now it can be openly accessible to people just with one click if they are available, if they have digital means available to them. So I think that is very important for us to think about. What is the economic justice aspects of the kind of work that we're putting out? What does it mean if we keep feeding publishers who have published me, Routledge, Palgrave, those kinds of places? They've all, I've worked with them over my career, but I am very happy to move away from that towards different kinds of economic models now, if at all possible. And we'll see what the difference will be, how this book might go versus books that I've had with other kinds of more international publishers. I mean, I write a lot. Many of the people I work with in this book are Australian, Aotearoa New Zealanders. It's a fairly international book, so we will see how that will track as the book goes out there. How a university press goes versus other kind of presses. And this is an issue more for the academics among us rather than those of us who work with independent presses. But it's an interesting question.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we are about out of time. So thanks again to everyone for joining in. And just another reminder, the next Spotlight will be Friday, April 22nd. Note the slight time difference. So one will start at 2 p.m. Eastern time rather than the regular 1 p.m. Eastern time in the US that we have been using. So the registration for that is through ASLE.org, and we hope to see you here again in about a month. Thanks again.